Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I hope you've had a fabulous morning. The sessions that I've seen have been amazing. I'm Mollie Cura, and today I'm going to be talking to you about some strategies you can use when working with your English language learners. If you have any questions during the session, you can tweet them to the hashtag that you see on the bottom of underneath my name there. So it's hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering, hashtag 12, and hopefully we'll have some time to take some questions at the end. So a couple of years ago, I moved to Spain, and while I had some background in Spanish, I wanted to improve. So I sought out a Spanish teacher, and the first day I went, he asked me, "So why are you here?" And I said, to learn Spanish. And he said, "Why? Why do you want to learn Spanish?" And I said, "Because I live in Spain." And this sort of went on for a little while until he said, "Why are you really here?" And I sort of admitted to a feeling incompetent. And I said, "When I do even the simplest things, I feel incompetent going to the market, getting directions, and so on." And he told me to try to shift my mindset and see myself not as someone who is deficient in one language, but someone who is fluent in one language and has the motivation, the capability, and the confidence to learn another language. So what I perceived as sort of my broken Spanish is actually an asset. And that really stuck with me, both as I was learning Spanish and as I was working with students who were learning English. I viewed myself through that lens and viewed them the same way. I viewed them as little people who are motivated, confident, and capable to learn another language. And so I hope that as we go through this presentation, you will keep that in mind. So we are going to get started with thinking about what we typically see in English language learner classrooms, or classrooms that are heavily populated with English language learners, and some things that we know, and then we'll get right into the strategies. So what we typically see in English language learner classrooms is we sort of have this assumed academic deficiencies. So we tend to put our students in the lowest reading group, the lowest math group. We sort of automatically seek out support for our students potentially without realizing what they can already do. We tend to see sort of a reductionist curriculum, so the passing on of information from teacher to student. We see this often in special ed models and in English language learner models, as opposed to a more holistic approach where we are creating and constructing knowledge together with our students. We see immersion as an instructional model, and while immersion is a fabulous tool for getting kids to become proficient in sort of social and conversational English, it's not necessarily going to bring kids up to academic English proficiency, especially if there's no formal instruction or language support involved as well. What do we know? We know that it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years for academic proficiency, for English academic proficiency. It can take 2 to 3 years to move from beginning stage to an intermediate stage, and 3 or 4 years at least to move from intermediate to sort of true proficiency and fluency. And so if you think about that in the life of a child, that's almost their entire, can be almost their entire academic career. So being patient with our little guys is very important. We know that on recent NAEP scores, our English language learners scored about 36 points below our non-English language learners in reading. We know that strengths in students' native language typically transfer to strengths in their second language. And so figuring out what they can do in their native language is critical to figuring out you know, what we want, where we want to move them for learning English, their second language. And luckily, we know that good instruction is good instruction. So building critical thinking skills, building creativity, developing problem-solving skills, evaluating information, analyzing text, sort of anything on the top of the Bloom's pyramid is fabulous instruction, not just for our general ed kids, not just for our higher level kids, but for our English language learners and for all students. So keeping that in mind, we'll talk about a few strategies that you can implement as soon as you get back to the classroom on Monday. We have what we call a shades of meaning word ladder, and that's a vocabulary focus primarily, but we'll talk about all the sort of the additional benefits. We have a language experience approach, which is fabulous for building ideas, building fluency in writing, helping students learn conventions and grammar. So we'll go through that. And maximizing cognates. And again, that's another vocabulary focus. Why so much vocabulary? We typically have this, educators typically have this sort of debate. Do we use a vocabulary program? Do we hope they pick up vocabulary sort of naturally? It's extremely important to teach vocabulary in some explicit way. Vocabulary predicts comprehension. So if you have students with limited vocabulary, their comprehension tends to be lower and their reading level tends to be lower because of that. And because they're reading lower level books, they have less exposure to sophisticated vocabulary, which sort of maintains them at this limited vocabulary bank. And of course, just the opposite is true for students with a more expansive vocabulary. They're reading on deeper levels, they're being exposed to more sophisticated vocabulary, and they're kind of soaring through these texts. We also know that vocabulary translates directly to students' writing. So when we're asking students to write a persuasive essay, we need to give them language, persuasive language to use in this essay. When we ask them to elaborate on their ideas, we need to give them that vocabulary. When we ask them to write more clearly, be clear when they're writing procedural texts and how-to pieces, descriptive pieces, and any vocabulary instruction we can give them will translate directly to their writing in that way. And of course, vocabulary is a proxy for learning content. So building that content knowledge, they need that vocabulary. So the purpose of the shades of meaning word ladder is to learn subtle differences between synonyms. And this was a technique I learned from Dr. Virginia Rojas, who does a lot of work with English language learners. Oftentimes what we see in our English language learners and with a lot of our students is that they're using the same words over and over again, right? How was your weekend? It was very fun. It was good, right? Or they're putting very or a little in front of something to distinguish shades of meaning. My food is hot. It's very hot, or it's a little bit hot. So these shades of meaning word ladders will give kids words for describing piping hot food or an exceptionally fun event. Additional benefits of the shades of meaning word ladder: they're learning multiple meaning words. So they're learning that the word light can mean the opposite of heavy, or it can mean bright. They're learning idioms and expressions, which, as we know, can really stump those English language learners. And so things like, I was feeling blue, to mean I was feeling sad, or it was a blast, to mean I had a great time, is a fabulous benefit of these word ladders. The students typically know these words in their native language, and we need to kind of catch them up to that. We don't need to sort of play down their second language. We need to give them these vocabulary words. They're sort of eager for them. I know when I was learning Spanish, I was really tired of using the same words over and over again. It promotes a fabulous discussion, a fabulous debate, is piping hot, hotter than steaming hot. And for the English language learners to even hear these debates among their non-English language learner peers is fabulous, and if they're participating in these debates, even better. And they'll learn parts of speech, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So when you start with your shades of meaning word ladders, you'll pick a set of antonyms. And what you'll do is you'll break your kids into groups. Typically, I'll break them into groups of about 3 or 4. If you have more than 3 or 4, typically what you get is a couple of kids working and a couple of kids letting them do the work. So small groups are preferable. And I'll do some English language learners and some non-English language learners, but you definitely want to have a mix for this activity. So we'll give them a set of antonyms, hot and cold. And as you can see here, I'll ask the kids to write the antonyms in their word study notebook, and then kind of make this word ladder going from 10 to 1. And I'll ask them to think of synonyms and think of words that mean different shades of hot. So very, very hot, a little bit hot, and to think of words that mean that. And the same thing with cold. And I'll typically ask them to just, on the side of this ladder, kind of brainstorm a list of these words. Once they've gotten a good-sized list, they'll pop the words into the word ladder in order. So the hottest hot will be up here, and the coldest cold will be down here. And after that, I'll call the kids back together, and I'll chart all of their responses. So anything that they kind of call out when we're doing, cold or when we're doing hot, I'll write on the board and sort of value everything that they've come up with. Then we'll sort of talk about what fits. So the most important thing is that the word does sort of mean a shade of meaning to that word, but that also it's the same part of speech. So to say something like fire for hot wouldn't necessarily work, and I would typically have them just put that into a sentence, right? It was a hot day, it was a fire day, doesn't work so much. We will also kind of take out words that have multiple meanings. So if a student says spicy for hot, we will have a discussion on what does spicy mean? Does it mean the opposite of cold? And if not, we'll kind of value it as a word, as something that we came up with during the brainstorming, but that doesn't fit in this particular word ladder. If they say mean for cold, right? Another fabulous discussion. Cold, if someone acts coldly, they're acting in a mean way for sure. But again, it's not the opposite of hot. So we'll take those words out, decide what does fit, and then decide on the order. And once we have the order, we'll make a word wall, something like this. Typically, you want to keep it in the same ladder format that the kids have in their notebook. And here the kids discussed warm and lukewarm. And so they wanted to figure out kind of where to put those, and decided that those should go right between hot and cold. And then you can see the other words that they came up with. As a teacher, it's not necessarily as important. Is Arctic colder than polar? I don't know. But they kind of come to a consensus as a class. And then what you'll do is you will put the word ladder up on your word wall. Typically in 4th grade or above, you want to have a word wall that's much more vocabulary based and less based on spelling. If you need to have a word wall, an individual word wall for struggling spellers or for your English language learners, that's fine. But your class word wall around 4th grade should start getting vocabulary based. And so picking the words, you can see we have happy, sad, pretty, ugly, fun, boring. You can pick these words based on, if they're just sort of overused in your classroom and you're tired of hearing them. You can pick them strategically for an upcoming unit. So if you're getting ready to write literary essays, you might want to pick some character traits, mean, nice, things like that. And then ways to reinforce the new vocabulary that you've just given the kids. Class points is something that I did in my classroom. So if they see it, if they see one of these words that we just put on the word ladder when they're reading and they show that to me or a friend, if they use it when they speak or if they use it in their writing, they'll get a point, whatever your system is. And then we'll typically talk about it. So I had a lovely student, and he was writing a birthday card to his sister, and he wrote, "Dear Sue, I hope you have a wonderful birthday. You're such a great sister, and you're stunning." And we had just done, a pretty ugly word ladder. And while stunning typically isn't a word used to just for a brother to describe a sister, we got the class point for it, but then we were able to kind of talk about, with these different shades of meaning, what's appropriate, what's most commonly used when talking about a sister, those kinds of discussions. And again, having those discussions is fabulous. Illustrations, and here we have Furious. And you can have the kids do this in their word study journals. They can take it home for homework. Anything, sort of incorporating the arts into your day is fabulous. And for your English language learners, it's a great visual product of what these words mean. Charades. I am a big advocate of getting kids kind of up and moving and getting them to play charades to act out something like Furious. Movement brings oxygen to the brain. You have enhanced brain function. You're releasing endorphins, so they're feeling less stressed, more at ease. You're increasing their focus and their ability to, give you attention. So anything to kind of get them up and moving, and then anything else that you typically do to, reinforce these skills and strategies. And we have the language experience approach. And this is something that, as many of you, I'm sure, read in your graduate school programs, that Sylvia Ashton Warner discussed. And she used this method with her English language learners in New Zealand with Maori children. I've sort of tweaked it here a bit to kind of fit the needs of my students, and you're free to certainly do the same. The purpose is to scaffold fluent writing. Some of the fabulous additional benefits are connecting writing with reading. So when kids are composing a text, comprehension is sort of inherently built in. And next time they see a text, they expect it to hold meaning, which sounds obvious, but as we know, there are many kids who approach a text and don't expect it to hold any meaning or can't find meaning in it. So this experience will help for those students. It values the student's zone of proximal development, so where they are with their vocabulary, where they are with language patterns, what they know about conventions. And when they're doing all of these things in a sort of social atmosphere, such as shared writing, language experience approach, it makes it a little bit more meaningful and more enjoyable, and hopefully teaches for transfer, so they can do this on their own. So the procedure is kind of gather your students on the rug. You can do this whole class, or you can do it sort of in a small group. If you're going to pick a small group, I would choose kids with similar writing or speaking abilities, or at least a small kind of narrow range. Or again, you get that wonderful phenomenon where you have 2 or 3 kids doing all the work and the other couple of kids letting them. You want to be able to write large enough so that everyone can see. So you want to be writing on a piece of chart paper, something that you can also keep to be reused. So first you'll have a discussion. You'll typically tell the kids which genre they're writing in. And what I'll do is I'll either pick the genre that we're currently working in, or I'll pick the genre that I know is upcoming, to kind of give them a jump start on that. And then you'll discuss what you want to write. So if it's a shared experience or a procedural text, you have a long conversation about how the text is sort of going to go, how it's going to, the chronology of it, what vocabulary you're going to use. And as you're going through this discussion, the students are developing their oral vocabulary, their language skills. So really take your time to have a nice sort of meaty discussion. After that, students will create the text. So you are doing the writing as the teacher, and the kids are kind of telling you what to write, how they want to start it, and they're watching as you write. The teacher can offer some suggestions on sort of social versus academic language, and Sylvia Ashton Warner says that you want to really value what the kids say and write down exactly what they say. I get a little bit worried about this because I worry that if I write down something that's incorrect, it's up there for all to see, and we'll all have a student who is paying very close attention while I'm writing this incorrectly, and then when we go to kind of fix it up is rolling around on the rug or is out getting his third drink of water in an hour. So you have to kind of see what works for you and your students. I also worry about changing what the students say, because then you're not valuing what they're bringing to the group. So I have no sort of definitive answer on that, and you're sort of free to play around with it. After you've created the text, you'll do a bit of a grammar review. Similarly to a writing conference or a reading conference, you don't want to sort of tackle everything that the kids have done wrong. It would be quite demoralizing and potentially could take quite some time. So in your mind, you will already know kind of what the kids need and what you'll end up focusing on, and then you can kind of guide the discussion that way. But the kids should also guide the discussion. So I noticed that he, you know, when David was talking about his sister, he said her eyes brown, and in English we would say her brown eyes. I think we should change that, whatever it might be. Then the teacher reads the piece out loud, reads the piece fluently, with expression and in a way that sort of holds meaning and shows the students that this text holds meaning, as all texts do. After that, the students read it, and they can discuss any new vocabulary that they've learned, any new language patterns that they're seeing. Really, you sort of have another kind of closing discussion on anything that they're noticing that they need help with. And this is a fabulous time for you to be kind of taking notes on what the kids are saying. Oh, I just learned this, or I never knew that, or I still don't understand this. It gives you a lot of information on your students. And then you can have them do any kind of extension activity. So they can write their own supplement to what you've just written. They can rewrite the piece in their own words, and this is fabulous for your more struggling guys, because what they'll end up doing is using some of your vocabulary, using some of your phrasing, which is fabulous, right? You want them to be taking what you've just taught them and kind of making it their own. And so rewriting in their own words is a heavily scaffolded approach, but some of your students will need that. They can reread the piece to build their fluency. They can tweak the vocabulary in the piece. You can put your piece in the writing center, in the reading center, and they can revisit it from time to time. And then you can also type up the piece and put it in the students' writing notebooks as an exemplar that they can refer to when they go to write that specific genre, which is fabulous. They sort of have their own mentor text that they've created. So we have here an example. The students went on an extended field trip, 2 or 3 days, called Colonius, and we have this first draft that says, last week went to Colonius. We did a hike and a zip line. We ate a delicious food for breakfast and lunch. The food for dinner weren't so good. And then as we talked about this piece and had discussions on phrasing and verbs and etc., we came up with, last week, our class went on the Colonius trip. We went for a hike, right? We did a hike is fine, but we might want to tell them we went for a hike is more commonly used, through the woods. And we did a zip line. I'm not even sure if you do a zip line, if that is the correct phrasing. The zip line was our favorite. Had to add that in. We had delicious food for breakfast and lunch instead of we eated. It's important to have a conversation about the past tense of eat is ate, but that commonly we wouldn't say we ate delicious food for breakfast, we would say we had delicious food. So having that discussion is great. And then using the conjunction, we combined the sentences. We had delicious food for breakfast and lunch, but the food we had for dinner was not very tasty. So that is your language experience approach. Cognates. Cognates are two words that in different languages that are similar or identical and have the same meaning. So animal, animal, vacation, vacación. And because 70% of English language learners in our schools are Spanish speaking, this section is kind of going to be Spanish focused. However, you of course can adapt this to the languages that you see in your classroom. 30 to 40% of English words have a link to Spanish words, which is absolutely incredible and exceptionally helpful if you're learning Spanish or English and you speak the other one. Typically what happens is students think, I speak one language at home and then I come to school and I speak another language. And those two things are not connected. And I sort of put these two things in a box, right? I speak Spanish at home and I speak English at school, and I have to kind of start from the bottom learning English, and that's not necessarily true. Many ELLs don't recognize cognates. So when we are speaking and we're thinking that when we're talking about animals, they must know that it's animal. They don't, they don't always, particularly if it's something that they're hearing and they don't see it in writing. So we talked a little bit about valuing the student's native language. So it's more easily recognized, cognates are more easily recognized in writing. So we want to make sure we're giving them opportunities to read and write these cognates. So one thing you can do with cognates to kind of maximize their power is to rewrite passages with cognates. So I wrote out a little passage about Ireland. I'm currently in Ireland. A journey to the Green Isle, Isle. Have you ever thought about visitando, Ireland, Irlanda, and so on? And you can see that I've put the Spanish word in green and in italics. And so if I were to give this to a student, the task of reading this and decoding these words and figuring out what this text means is much less daunting because they're able to see that on every line they know a couple of words. And that sort of builds their confidence as they go to approach more sophisticated texts. Now, I don't recommend rewriting passages with cognates for every passage that you give them, for every piece of text that you give them. That would take forever. But if you create these with a team, you can keep them in a shared space on Google Drive, a shared drive of some sort. And as the years go on, you can use them again in future years. You can use them in across different content areas, so social studies, science, etc. You can also, in guided reading, you can do this just for the first couple of pages of a text or what have you, but kind of playing around with it will be helpful. And as the year progresses and as the students progress in their knowledge of English, you may need to do this less and less often. The creation of a cognates word wall. So we talked earlier about getting away, especially in the upper elementary grades, from a spelling-based word wall to more vocabulary or more sophisticated word wall, and a cognates word wall is fabulous. The cognates word wall could be theme-based. So here we have a teacher who is studying animals with her class, and she has the English and the Spanish word, and then some picture clues you can see there to sort of be very heavily supported in the students' learning. Here we have another word wall where it's spelling pattern based. So words that end in ity in English typically end in dad in Spanish. So probability, probabilidad, possibility, posibilidad, and so on. Words that end in ary, like dictionary, typically end in ario. So having sort of that spelling pattern based word wall. Or you can do sort of a frequency-based word wall. So they're always using these words and their cognates. Let's put them up there. You can ask your kids to decide kind of what they want to put up on the word wall. So as they are going about their day, reading text, hearing text, speaking with friends, you can have them write down the cognate, what they think might be a cognate, on a sticky note or on an index card, and then pop it in our cognates box, and once a week you can kind of take out the cognates and go through them, and we'll talk about in just a minute kind of what you'll say as the kids are identifying their own cognates, and then decide whether or not you want to put them up on your word wall. A guided reading extension using cognates. As either part of the introduction to a text or as a subsequent read-through of a text, you can ask the kids to look for cognates. Again, they can write these cognates on a sticky note, they can underline them, write them on an index card, and then you'll have a discussion about them. So you want to first discuss if they actually are cognates. There's a great word in Spain, we call them false cognates, but in Spain they call them false friends, and there's no translation. It's just, these are false friends. So a very common false friend is embarrassed, and in Spanish there's a word embarazada, and embarazada means pregnant. So if you're trying to say I'm very embarrassed and you're saying you're very pregnant, it's funny. And so identifying whether the cognates are true cognates or whether they're these false friends, and kids love calling things false friends. You also want to discuss the spelling and pronunciation. So if you have biography and biografia, you can look at the spelling, right? The kids are going to notice that funny PH. Why does that make the F sound? This accent mark, right? The pronunciation of the word, biography, biografia, talking to them about that. Checking for roots. So a Greek or Latin root, bio, the meaning is life, and then you'll give them examples in both Spanish and English, biography, biology, and so forth. And you can give them sort of a chart, have them make a little chart in the back of their writing notebook, in the back of their word study notebook, I suppose, that looks like that. And as they go, they can kind of gather these roots, gather these root words. And again, this is, of course, fabulous for not only your English language learners, but all of your learners. So a few other tips before we head out. One of the most important things to do with your English language learners is to work with their prior knowledge. If you are using texts that have familiar content, the students are going to be kind of freed up in their brain, to put it very simply, to focus more on things like comprehension. So if you're using texts from their country, if you're using texts about things they like to do, anything that they have prior knowledge on is fabulous, and there are lots of ways to activate that prior knowledge. If you are teaching something that they don't have any prior knowledge on, it's really critical that you give them some prior knowledge. And again, as we know, this is just great instruction for all students. Doing some color coding. So if you are having them summarize and summarize something they learned in science or social studies, they can, underline the facts in blue, the inferences in purple, the big idea in green. And that gives them a sense not only of what they've put in this summary, but also how much of each thing they've put, and gives them language for, oh, this is a fact, this is an inference, gives them more of that vocabulary. The same thing in writer's workshop. So when they're writing narratives or creative pieces, they can underline the action in blue, the dialogue in pink, and the internal thinking in green. And that has sort of the same effect, so it's very visual. A couple of fabulous games to play, and again, getting your kids kind of up and moving. There's a game from Responsive Classroom called Padoodle. Have your kids, one kid steps out of the room, and the students decide that Padoodle means, it has to be a verb, so it means something like jump, and the student returns to the room and asks questions. Do we Padoodle a lot in the classroom? Do we Padoodle when we play basketball? And through these questions, the student's able to figure out what Padoodle means. This shows kids that they can use strategies even if they don't know a word. If they don't know a word, whether it's because it's not in their language, or for sort of your general ed students because it's too complex a word, they just haven't heard it before, they have these strategies of figuring them out, kind of building their confidence through a game. And Kelly Cartwright has in her book a fabulous game. Her book is called Word Callers, and she has this really fun sort of homophone game. So you would give the kids a clue, such as a bunny's wig, and the answer would be a hare's hair, or sending a boy through the post, mail, mail. A bright boy who lives in the sky would be sun, sun. And the kids, of course, love these games, and the English language learners get to hear that these words have multiple meanings, and then kind of writing them up on the board so they can see the different spellings is great. Some sentence starters that I put up on my website, so I can show you how to get there in a minute. Things like the key information is, I already know that blank, but I'm wondering about blank. Giving them a little bit of language, so being a little bit more sort of heavy-handed when needed. And then, of course, using redundant key information. So if you are giving the kids instructions, you also want to show something visual, whether it's up on the board or giving the students a graphic organizer is a great way to get them to sort of truly understand what they need to be doing. Using gestures is fabulous. And so if you have any questions, you can tweet them. Ryan, my tech helper, do we have any tweets or any questions?
Yeah, well, I've just been kind of looking over Twitter, and you've gotten a lot of positive feedback. Specifically, people really liked your work with those strategies you were providing around cognates. So they were happy to see that. And the question I have for you is actually a little bit more general about the strategies, and that is how often should these strategies really be used, and how long do they take? How much time does this take out of the class?
Sure. It's really sort of up to what the students need. For the word ladders, I would typically do them every week, kind of an activity on Monday that then goes throughout the week, and they have different games and activities and reinforcement strategies that they can do as the week progresses. For the cognate activities, there's for the rewriting of passages, I would do that maybe once every couple of weeks. If the kids need it more often, you can do it more often than that. The language experience approach takes a little bit of time out of the day, and so to do one of those maybe once a month, once or twice with every writing unit would be sufficient. And I would have your language experience approach go across a couple of days, because it will take a while, especially for younger kids, having them try to sit through that. All 6 steps will be a little bit tricky. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for taking those questions and for teaching us so much.
Of course. And if anyone has any other questions, you can certainly tweet or email me. You can check out my website, curaliteracyconsulting.com, and I have a link there to different resources that I've put up, not only for this presentation, but for other workshops I've run in the past. So do check out the website, and thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks for your help, and everyone, thanks for joining me on a Saturday.